Hello, welcome to a new Oxygen XML webinar. Thank you for joining us today. My name is George Bina, and I will be your host today. And I invited my colleague Alex Gitianu to present you how you can use Markdown with Oxygen, and in particular in connection to DITA. Before we start, there is some useful information that I want to share with you. First, the most frequently asked question is whether the webinar will be recorded or not, and the answer is yes, the webinar will be recorded, and the recording will be available from the event page, the page that you use to register for the webinar, as well as on our Oxygen XML YouTube channel. Regarding questions, we encourage you to ask questions at any time during the webinar, so you do not forget them. I'll try to answer them as we go, but at the end of the webinar, we also have a dedicated time when we want to go through the questions, and you get the chance to ask additional questions also at the end. For asking your questions, you can use either the questions panel in the GoToWebinar interface, or we'll also monitor the Twitter account, so you can address your questions to the Oxygen XML account or mark them with the Oxygen XML hashtag. So without further ado, let me give control to my colleague Alex to start his presentation. So let me make Alex the presenter and try to introduce him. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Alex Gitianu.
Thank you very much, George, for your kind and spectacular introduction. Hello, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for attending this webinar that we dedicated to DITA and to Markdown. Before we begin, a few words about today's agenda. So we'll begin by talking a bit about content and markup, see what structure authoring means and what benefits it brings. A few words about Markdown and its strong points, as well as about DITA and its own strengths. But for the bigger part of this webinar, we will see how Markdown and DITA fare inside the documentation project, what options you have to work with both of these markup languages. So it all starts with the content. Through content, we convey knowledge to the reader. This here is a typical task that describes, for example, how to create a Google account on your Android mobile phone. But content alone is not enough, and I hope you'll agree with me and Boromir when we say that today one does not simply write content without structure. But why do we need structure is the obvious question. Well, through structure, we can define the model of our content, the way it is organized. And in turn, structure also helps us to enforce this defined model. If we check for a specific structure, then it means it respects our defined model. This in turn results in an increase in consistency. What does that mean is that if, for example, we write recipes and our recipes should have a cooking time, a list of ingredients, and some cooking steps. In a structured environment, it means that all the recipes that come from the writers will automatically have these three required sections. So an editor doesn't have to manually go through all of them and verify that they have these three sections. So this is it's a great way and empowers automatic processing like quality checks or even continuous delivery, continuous publishing, which in turns leads to faster publishing workflows, which is the end goal of any documentation, any content, to reach the end user as fast as possible. So now, if we take another look at our content, we begin to see the meaning that lies beneath. So for example, the first line is a title, followed by some sort of a short description, and after that, it's the actual procedure that a user has to perform to create the account. Now, all we have to do is encode this meaning by using a markup language. This markup language can be Markdown. And here you can see a possible version of our content encoded in Markdown. And some strong points of Markdown that are worth mentioning are, for example, Markdown is easy to learn. I bet that after just a quick glance at this topic, you'll be able to encode similar topics right away. It is minimalistic, just a glance, and you can distinguish the content from the markup, so you don't have to add a lot of markup. There are many authoring tools available, as well as publishing tools, static site generators, and so on. That's always a benefit. This markup language could be XML, which is an acronym that stands for Extensible Markup Language. It is a language in which you define your own markup, your own tags, they're called in XML, and it has powerful mechanisms to enforce valid content structure, the so-called schemas. It can be either a DTD or an XML schema or schematron. There are various options available. And this brings us to DITA, which is an XML-based open standard for structuring, developing, managing, and publishing content. It is a semantic markup, which is quite important. It separates formatting from content. It has strong content reuse concepts and built-in mechanisms for restricting and specializing data according to your specific needs. Actually, the bird on the DITA logo, in case you're not aware with that, it's actually a finch, a bird that has specialized its beak according to its diet. So for example, if it feeds with seeds, it will have a strong, thick beak to break those seeds. And last but not least, because DITA is a standard, there's a huge ecosystem of publishing choices available. So in the beginning, you can start small, maybe publishing to what the DITA Open Toolkit offers. But as you go, maybe you'll choose to put your content in a dynamic delivery platform. And that would be quite easy because they also exist in this ecosystem around the DITA. Right, so if you put them side by side, so on the left there's the Markdown encoded version, and on the right the DITA one. At first glance, the DITA version might look a bit more complex, more intimidating, but that's because because I've chosen to use semantic markup with DITA. So here you see that I have a menu cascade, and the settings here, it's an UI control, and accounts is another UI control. So I'm focusing on the meaning of these words, as opposed to the Markdown version, where the limitation of the language forced me to just mark as bold the settings and the account words. So I'm just saying they are somehow important, but it's not that obvious in which way. Moreover, nowadays there are visual editors available for both Markdown and for XML. So on the left here, this is a visual editor for Markdown, and on the right here, it's actually, this is a screenshot from Oxygen XML editor. This is how it visually renders DITA. So with both languages, a writer can focus on the content, on the semantics, so the markup will not get in the way. So that shouldn't be a defining factor when you choose one language or another. So in the wildlife, there are documentation projects written exclusively in DITA, as there are documentation projects written exclusively in Markdown. But we will focus on a scenario in which you have your main documentation project written in DITA, and you have contributors like developers who are sending content in Markdown. So we'll see what options we have in such a documentation project. Well, the first obvious solution, if this is a one-time thing, if you're just receiving some Markdown files with some release notes that nobody will touch afterwards, is to just convert the Markdown to DITA, put it in your documentation project, and never look back. How you can do that? Well, you can go from Markdown to HTML using Pandoc, which is a tool for converting between a multitude of formats. And afterwards, you can go from HTML to DITA using this other tool available on the DITA Open Toolkit SourceForge page. Another option is to go directly from Markdown to DITA. There's a DITA Open Toolkit plugin developed by Jarno Eloverta, which is available on GitHub, and it is also included in the DITA Open Toolkit. And there's also an Oxygen batch converter plugin available, which is based on this previously mentioned Open Toolkit plugin. To install this converter plugin in Oxygen, it is quite simple. You just go to Help, install new add-ons, and then just select all available sites, or maybe just the default one. And it's this one over here, the batch converter. In my case, it is disabled because it's already installed, so I can't install it again. But in your case, you'll be able to select it and then just click next and follow the installation procedure. And after you do that, to use it, so this here, it's a Markdown file. On the left, you see the Markdown. On the right, you see a preview in either DITA, or you can switch to HTML here on the bottom. And to use the converter plugin, the batch converter, in the project view, in the contextual menu, there's a batch converter entry, and in this case, the plugin knows to convert between multiple formats. But in our case, we are interested in the Markdown to DITA option, so we just selected. Okay, convert. And now I have DITA content. See this, there's a body and a topic and a title and paragraphs. So all I have to do now is maybe change things a bit, put more semantics in the topic, because being converted from Markdown, it lacks any semantics. So I might put menu cascade, UI controls, other semantic markup, and after that integrate it in my documentation project. So that was the first option. Now, if the Markdown files evolve, if either the developers or yourself will make additions, changes to them over time, then converting them might become too much of a chore, too complicated. So in this case, an obvious solution would be to keep the Markdown file and use it in DITA as they are. And to do that, I will present two solutions to you. The first way you can do that is through dynamic conversions or custom URLs. A URL looks like this. So what you write in a browser to access a web page is actually a URL. The first part is the scheme or the protocol that identifies the URL implementation. And after that, you have a domain name or a path. But the idea is that the URL implementation knows how to interpret this path in order to identify a resource, and so you can read it. And the idea is that you can create your own custom URLs, and there is such a custom URL implementation called DITA Glass available on Oxygen XML GitHub page. And through it, you can access Markdown files using this MD2DITA protocol, followed by the path to the Markdown file. And what happens is that whenever someone will try to access this Markdown file through this DITA Glass protocol implementation, it will receive DITA content instead of Markdown. So there will be a dynamic conversion happening on the fly when the resource is accessed. So what the reader will receive will be actual DITA content. So I'm going to show a sample to you. So I'll open a map, a DITA map. It looks like a normal DITA map, but if we look closer at the topic refs, you'll notice that here we have actually a Markdown file, the Markdown file that I've previously presented to you, but it is referenced through this MD2DITA protocol. So when I try to access, if I open this Markdown file, you'll notice that I actually receive DITA content. So it's this conversion from Markdown to DITA that is happening on the fly when the Markdown file is being accessed. And this protocol idea brings other interesting applicabilities. For example, here I'm referring a spreadsheet with some sales numbers, but I refer it through this Excel to SVG protocol. So what this will do is it will convert the spreadsheet to an SVG file, again on the fly, to an SVG file that shows me those numbers in a graphical manner. So quite cool. So that was the first option available to you through these custom URLs. The second solution that's available to you is to refer the Markdown file directly in your map, like so, but specify as format Markdown. I also have a map, a hybrid map done like that. So now if I open this other map, you'll notice that these garage tasks here at the beginning are all Markdown files. So if I open them, you see this is a Markdown file. And the concepts are actually DITA files. So maybe the concepts are written by a technical writer, and these garage tasks are written by an engineer, which prefer Markdown. But everything is transparent. So, for example, if I publish this map to an output like a web help responsive, I will see no difference between the content that came from Markdown and the content that came from DITA. Right, so the garage tasks, which came from Markdown content, and the garage concepts, which came from actual DITA content. So from the user perspective, everything is transparent. It doesn't really matter how this content was encoded. And so another thing worth mentioning is that in these Markdown files, you can use specific DITA concepts. For example, right. So you can put metadata in these YAML headers at the beginning of the file. So like author and source and publisher. And if we choose export as DITA topic in the preview available on the right, and switch to text mode so we can see the actual DITA markup, you'll notice that a prologue was generated, and the author and the source and the publisher, we have the corresponding DITA elements put here in the prologue. Whenever you put a hash, so header followed by some text, this will generate a topic, and this will be the title. And you can control what type of information type gets generated, if it is a topic or a task or a concept, by using this attribute in the attribute section. So in the attribute section, if you put .task, it will generate a task. If you put .concept, then it will generate a concept, and so on. Let's see what else. To create references to images, you start with a bang sign. This is the alternate text. This is the reference to the image. We can see here in the preview on the right the image being referred. To make topic references, you do it like this. If you have keys defined in your map, like I have here, so if we look here in the map, you'll notice that I have a key named water hose that points to the DITA concept that describes the water hose. So if you have such a key, you can create key references just by putting the key name between square brackets, like so. And if we switch to, we can switch to the published output, and you notice here is a key reference, and if we click it, it will take us to the water hose topic. So it works seamlessly. Right. Another thing that I want to mention before moving forward is that instead of, when you're referring these Markdown files, instead of using format Markdown, you can use mdita instead. And what it means is that this Markdown file will be treated as a lightweight DITA topic. So what is lightweight DITA? Well, lightweight DITA is a proposed standard for expressing simplified DITA documents in either XML, HTML, or Markdown. So you see, the idea is that the model is the important, the core concept. How you serialize that model is not that important. You could serialize it in XML, you could serialize it in HTML or in Markdown. As long as it's the same model, it doesn't really matter. And the core goals of lightweight DITA are to provide a simpler DITA experience and to provide mappings between XML, HTML5, and Markdown that enable individuals to, and again, this is important for our case, to author content in their format of their choice, so either XML or Markdown, and to easily exchange and publish content whose source exists in these different markup languages. So again, the focus is on the model, not on how that model is being serialized. So that was the second approach. Some advantages that I see with going this way. You'll achieve single sourcing across DITA and Markdown, so your single source of truth will be either in DITA or in Markdown. It doesn't matter that much, as long as it respects the model. You can collaborate on the Markdown source file by passing it between developers and yourself. You are able to use DITA features like you've seen with the references, as well as DITA publishing options with Markdown. So you'll be able to publish to all the publishing options that DITA offers. And what's interesting is that one of these publishing options is actually Markdown. So this DITA Open Toolkit plugin allows you to publish your hybrid DITA map to Markdown, and afterwards you can make use of publishing platforms and static site generators available for Markdown, like Jekyll and MK Docs and so on. And actually here on this link I have such an example. So I've configured Netlify here to use MK Docs and generate such a static site for my hybrid project. So this is my DITA hybrid project that contained DITA topics and Markdown topics. And on Netlify, I've generated Markdown, and then I fed this Markdown into mkdocs, and I got quite easy, well, nice looking documentation out of my content. Some disadvantages, so that are also worth mentioning, and you should be aware of before making a decision. The biggest one would be that Markdown lacks semantics, so you'll be restricted to using markup like lists and bold and italic with no semantic, no meaning. You might encounter consistency challenges because Markdown is not a standard. That means you can receive different flavors. What you receive might not abide to your model, so you might have to develop some scripts that run on the Markdown files and make sure they respect your model. If we were to talk about the recipe example, the script should make sure that you have the cooking time and the list of ingredients and the procedure somehow. There are also some Markdown language restrictions, like for example, you can't put a list inside a table cell. Maybe in your case, you won't have to do that. There are no reuse mechanisms in Markdown defined, so if you want to do reuse across Markdown, then you might have to invent some mechanisms yourself, but then again, maybe you don't need them for the Markdown files. And also, if you want to review the Markdown, if you want to uh, collaborate and to record the changes, you might encounter some challenges as well. For example, if you do this on the Markdown source, if you want to track changes on the Markdown source, that will be a bit difficult because there's no support for tracking changes. So there's no way to annotate, to embed them, such metadata inside the Markdown source. So it will be difficult to visualize changes. So you might need to rely on diffs to see what's the difference between the original Markdown file and what I'm getting now from after it's been reviewed by a developer and so on. You could do it on the converted content, like for example on PDF, and basically this means that the writer will generate the PDF and then the developer will review on the PDF, and the writer will get the PDF and will have to incorporate the review information back into the content, in the original content. And such a workflow might bring an extra overhead. Well, it definitely brings an overhead to incorporate this review into the source. And if you do it often, then it will become a nuisance and a headache. So all of these are aspects that you need to consider. The next question that comes to mind is, why do developers tend to use Markdown in the first place? And a few answers that come to mind are that it has a low learning curve. I mean, just by looking at a Markdown file, and you'll be able to write similar encoded files yourself. You do things fast in it. It's quite minimalistic, like I said. The developers maybe don't have time to learn another language because they have their day-to-day tasks to attend to, and why not? They don't need any additional tool installed on their system, so they don't have to use your technical writer tool stack in order to give you this content. So the third solution: could developers write DITA content in the first place? And the answer is, of course, yes, they can. And I have a few suggestions on how to facilitate that. The first approach that you could take is to learn it as you use it through Markdown to DITA control conversions, like a learning assistant, if you will. And there is such an implementation available on Oxygen XML GitHub page. It's called DITA Mark, and it is powered by Schematron quick fixes. And I want to show it to you as well. So I open a DITA file. So this is a DITA file. So if we switch to DITA, we see DITA markup. If we switch to text page. But the developer doesn't know how to insert a list, for example. So he writes the list the same way that he would write it in Markdown, with an asterisk followed by text. And after it does that, this little quick fix light bulb will appear, and it will say, you can create a list from this. And if I click create a list, then I'll see that it replaced that content with a UL element and with li in it. So maybe after I do this 2 or 3 or 4 times, after that I'll remember the name of these DITA elements of this DITA markup, and I'll write them in the first place. So the same goes if I want to put a quote. If I write it the Markdown way, and then I get a quick fix to create a quote, and now I see that I should have used an LQ element. Maybe if I want to write some code, a quick fix will appear and will put a code phrase for me. So like I said, after a few such iteration, at some point, the developer will begin to remember these data elements and use them instead of the Markdown style. Another option would be to give developers specialized editing environments, and it's a bonus if they are cloud-based. So like I said, they don't have to install anything on their system, just follow a link and give you the content or the review information right away. And this specialized editing environment could be a plain specialized UI, like a HTML form that generates consistent data, for example, like this. So here I have an HTML form. It's a template for a task. I give the title, I give the short description, maybe a few steps. And after I click submit, a data content will be generated and sent to the technical writer. So as a bonus, the developer focuses on the content, not on the formatting, while it writes such a template. Another option would be to use specialized web-based DITA editors, like, for example, the Oxygen XML web author, which looks like this. So if I follow this link, imagine I'm a developer and I'm following a link, and I get the content presented in a visual manner. Again, this is a DITA content underneath. So this is DITA markup, but presented in a visual manner. So I can focus on the content, and I have a toolbar to insert markup. So I don't have to know anything in order to begin using it. And another interesting option is to use Oxygen Content Fusion, which is a great way for collaboration. And how to do that? Well, in Oxygen, if you click this action here on the toolbar, you'll see the Content Fusion Task Manager, and all you have to do is drag and drop a few topics that need to be reviewed by, let's say, a developer or a subject matter expert. Something for review, and when you click upload, these files will be uploaded to the Content Fusion platform, and afterwards you can, if we click on it, I will go to the Content Fusion web platform, and if I click share, I'll get a link that I can then send to my reviewers, to developers or subject matter experts, and when they follow it, they will see this the same view, and they will be able to edit these files and give me their review information, and all these changes are recorded, so with track changes, and they can put comments like so, and I can also collaborate with them in the Content Fusion platform, and when I'm happy with the result, with all the changes, I'll go back to Oxygen and click Get Changes. And I'll be able to merge these changes into my own copy of these documents before committing the changes to the versioning system, maybe to the CMS or GitHub or wherever I'm keeping my content. So as a conclusion, I would say that there is no one-size-fits-all solution, but as a rule of thumb, if it's a one-time thing, you can convert it, or you can keep them together, both DITA and Markdown, achieve single sourcing, get access to both worlds, get the best of both worlds, but also be aware that consistency and collaboration challenges might require a switch to DITA, which is entirely possible. So thank you for watching and following me all way to this point. If you have any questions that you haven't already asked, now will be a good time to ask them. So George, do we have questions?
Thanks, Alex. Let me make myself the presenter for a moment. And as we give attendees a few minutes to ask questions, let me also focus on some of the upcoming events that we have. So all the following webinars and conferences we participate to are made available on our events page. So on our website under company events, you can find the upcoming webinars and upcoming conferences where you can meet us. So next week we will have a webinar that is called Getting Started with Oxygen, which is useful not only for people that just start with Oxygen, but I think also for people that are using Oxygen to discover maybe new tips and tricks on how to better use Oxygen. And this will have also a question and answer section where you can ask us, how can I do this in Oxygen, or is this possible in Oxygen, and so on. Next, you can find our team at the Evolution of Technical Communication in Sofia, Markup UK in London, Technical Communication UK in September. At the SlavaCon, Alex actually will present a workshop, a half-day workshop on using DITA with and Markdown together. So it will be a hands-on workshop where you can get to try and test, how things work and so on.
All right. An in-depth look at how you can manage such hybrid projects and how you can do quality checks on them and continuous publishing and all sorts of needed features.
After that, in November, we will be at DITA Europe, and in connection with DITA Europe, we organized in the last 5 years DITA OT Day, which is a free event dedicated to the DITA Open Toolkit project, a full day event, and that will be just after DITA Europe at the same location in Brussels. And then the following week will be at TC World in Stuttgart. So yeah, these are the following events where you can find us. There are also some additional events like the Balisage conference that we sponsor, but unfortunately we do not attend that this year. Yeah, so going back to questions. So question says, does DITA Glass work on Oxygen Web Author? I mean, is the converted content visible in Web Author as well as standalone Oxygen? Is it possible to publish content from Web Author using DITA Glass as well as from standalone Oxygen? Unfortunately, DITA Glass does not directly work with the Web Author right now. We need to actually test that, I think. But what you can actually use is Markdown in the Web Author. We added in the last release of the Web Author, so together with version 21, part of the version 21 release of Oxygen, we also released version, the Oxygen XML Web Author, and that included support for Markdown. So the Web Author can edit Markdown directly, and then you can use the DITA Open Toolkit support for handling publishing Markdown to actually publish mixed DITA and Markdown content to any possible output format that comes from DITA OT. The Web Author itself is not a publishing engine, right? So that's another thing. But in general, when you use the Web Author, you use that in connection with some repository. So for instance, if you use it with GitHub, then you can set up a CI a continuous integration server like Travis or Jenkins to monitor updates on the GitHub repository and automatically publish that content on some web server. Does all versions of Oxygen support Markdown? Well, not all the versions of Oxygen, but I think we added the Markdown support in the desktop version a couple of years ago. Actually, you can find, so if you go on our website, so company events is the place where you find these upcoming events and past events. So you can also see, you know, the previous events and get access to the recordings. But on our website, we also have the history page, history.html, and here you can find all the release notes. For instance, if you click on the Oxygen XML, then you have the version 21, the version 20, and then you can see, you know, what was added, what was new in each of these versions, and at some point, probably maybe in version 19, you see it's the Markdown editor that was added in Oxygen 19.0, right? So the Markdown support was added in version 19. But we improved the Markdown support in the last version of Oxygen. So I'll actually recommend using the latest version to benefit of all those improvements. Will this webinar be accessible afterwards? Yes, as I mentioned also at the beginning, we record all our webinars, and the recording will be available either from the event page. So this will move actually in the past events section, which is, you know, if you just scroll down, you find the past events, or just click here. And on this page will include the slides and the recording of the webinar. Another thing that I want to you know, kind of clarify is that many people say, you know, but we really like Markdown because it's so simple, so easy, but we want to have profiling, we want to have reuse, we want to have semantic markup and so on, but using the Markdown syntax. And the thing is that Markdown is easy, and it's simple, and it seems natural because it takes advantage actually of an organic markup, let's say, because when you have a list and you see some text and that has star something, star something, star something, we as humans will interpret that as a list. So then it's easy to understand, and you know, that's how we think that Markdown is easy, right? If we see something enclosed in 2 stars, it's an emphasize. We see that you know, that it's something that draws attention. But if we add a lot of additional ways to express different things, and we do that in not a natural organic matter, you know, then it will be cryptic and it will not be easy anymore. Because if you actually want to encode profiling, reuse 100 different semantic options, you know, different elements that we have, like the different elements that we have in DITA, there's an inherited complexity to that. So you cannot really just say, if we use Markdown, then that will be easy, because then you will invent some convention to say, oh, this is an API name, right? So then we put curly bracket and star, and that means API name or something, right? That will not be natural anymore. So people will find that even more difficult than just calling that with the API name element as it is in DITA, right? So that's that's one of the things that I wanted to kind of clarify. And another thing is that you can, as Alex presented, you can mix Markdown and DITA. So you can use basically in the DITA space, you can just have a map that just aggregates Markdown topics, or as you need more semantic or reuse, you can move gradually some of those topics to DITA. So you can mix and match. And on the publishing side, you can publish Markdown from DITA, and then you can reuse any of the publishing tools that you will normally use with Markdown content. So again, you don't lose anything on the publishing side. There are only things that you gain by taking advantage of all the other options that the DITA Open Toolkit and other publishing solutions around DITA will offer to you. Yeah, so that was what I wanted to add. So Alex, do you want to add anything else? I see that our audience today is a bit quiet, not so many questions.
Well, I think you've summarized it quite nicely, George. So yes, Markdown is simple, and if you want to keep it simple, then it's best to use it for simple tasks. And as you need more from it, you can move from a Markdown source to DITA, so you can convert it to DITA and begin using reuse and other or profiling or other complex and powerful mechanisms that DITA has. So yeah, so starting with a hybrid project and moving forward, we'll get you access to both worlds and to the benefits and the strong points of both of these markup languages.
Yeah, so we have actually, I have on my GitHub account, there's an interesting project maybe that shows how you can have like a wiki-based implementation, or wiki implementation based on GitHub pages for publishing, Travis for automating builds, and DITA, lightweight DITA, and Markdown. So basically, this is the published content available on GitHub pages with the lightweight DITA topic that you see here, a full DITA topic, and a Markdown topic. And if you click on the edit online link, this will show you how the Markdown looks like if it's edited in the web author, so you can quickly see also, you know, how the web author support for Markdown editing, right? So it will provide this kind of view. If we save this and commit, the website will automatically be rebuilt by Travis, or we can also go back here and maybe access the lightweight DITA topic, hit edit online, and the web author will provide a lightweight DITA editing experience for XML-based structure. So this will kind of show, you know, like benefit of this kind of inline hints, or if you have a reference, you can edit the href, for instance, directly in line, or add additional content. You just can hit this plus button and see, maybe add a table, change the structure of the table, and so on, right? And again, as you save, Travis will probably start to rebuild the project after a few seconds and so on. You see that it already started to rebuild that Markdown. After that change to the Markdown topic, the Travis started to rebuild the website for this. So, you know, we should see this updated in a few seconds probably after the build. is finalized. Yeah, so you can find all the details, the source of this. You can fork actually this into your account and have something similar if you want. So yeah, this should be ready. It takes a bit more time because actually we download the DITA Open Toolkit, we download the Oxygen Web Help, we download a lot of resources to make this well, yeah. This caches some resources, I think, but yeah. So you see Markdown demo. So the edit that we just made appeared on in the output. Okay, so I think we are at the end of the hour. Thanks, Alex, for presenting this webinar. Again, if you attend LavaCon in Portland, Oregon, Alex will have a half-day workshop on using Markdown and DITA. So you are welcome to join us there. I will be there with Alex to help with the, the hands-on exercises and so on. So. And if you have think of some other questions after the webinar, feel free to contact us at support@oxygenxml.com or on Twitter at oxygenxml, and we'll be happy to answer your questions. So thank you again, and thanks, Alex, and hope to see you next week for our next webinar.
Thank you all for attending. Bye-bye.
Bye.